For a long time, all I knew was what I had been told. I was told the land was not mine, that the sky over it was not mine, that the dirt under my fingernails was a memory I had no right to keep. You see, for years I believed a story that began with an ending that was handed to me in a cold kitchen by people who shared my blood but not my heart. They said our grandfather had left us nothing but the clothes on our backs and a decent name, and for a long time, that was the only inheritance I claimed. I stand on this porch now, watching the sun burnish the tops of the long grasses, and I know the truth is a seed. It can be buried, trampled, forgotten under the weight of a hard winter, but it does not die. It waits for the right conditions, for a crack in the frozen ground, for a single ray of light. My story, the real one, is about that light, and how my sister and I learned to stand in it after spending so long in the shade of a carefully constructed lie. It is the story of 70 acres of land that were always ours, even when we were 100 miles away, scrubbing other people's floors and trying to forget the smell of pine and damp earth after a rain. We didn't know he had left it all to us. We didn't know that his silence in those last few years was not abandonment, but the careful, patient work of a man building a fortress we would one day need. He was building it for us, with paper and ink and the force of law, while we were still learning the shape of the world from the calluses on his hands. Our world, for the first 16 years of our lives, was measured by the boundaries of that land. It was a kingdom of 70 acres, and Grandpa Henry was its quiet, steady king. He was not a man of many words. His lessons came in the form of weight and weather. He taught us the heft of a full milk pail in the blue light of dawn, the ache in the shoulders that meant the wood was split for the week. He taught us the language of the sky, how the clouds gathered low and bruised before a storm, how the wind changed its tune when it carried the promise of snow. Abigail and I, we were his shadows. Where he went, we followed, our small legs working to keep pace with his long, deliberate stride. He never told us we were learning. He never sat us down to explain the rotation of crops or the signs of a sick calf. We just watched. We watched him run a line of fence, his movements economical and sure, the post driver rising and falling with a rhythm like a heartbeat. We watched him gentle a new filly, his voice a low murmur, his hand resting on her neck until her trembling stopped. He would let us help in small ways, our hands clumsy next to his. We'd scatter feed for the chickens, their frantic, happy clucking filling the morning air. We'd pull weeds from the vegetable plot, the sun hot on our necks, our fingers stained with green. The land was not an idea to us, it was a physical presence. It was the sharp smell of the pines at the northern edge, the soft, giving mud by the creek, the hard-baked clay of the yard in August. It was the taste of the first wild strawberries, small and intensely sweet, that grew along the stone wall. Grandpa Henry was part of it, inextricable, like an old oak tree whose roots ran so deep they held the whole place together. He never once said, "This will be yours." He never spoke of the future at all. He just showed us the work. The work was the thing that lasted. He passed in the autumn, when the leaves on the cottonwoods by the creek had turned a brittle, fiery gold. The quiet of the house became a different kind of quiet, a hollow, ringing silence that even our footsteps couldn't fill. And then they arrived. Our Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Robert. They came in a hired buggy that looked too clean for our dusty lane, their city clothes a stark black against the landscape of faded greens and browns. Aunt Beatrice walked into the kitchen, the heart of our home, and ran a gloved finger over the wooden countertop. She did not weep. She assessed. Uncle Robert stood behind her, a tall, stooped man with eyes that seemed to see only figures on a ledger. We stood by the cold stove, my sister and I, two girls suddenly made small in our own home. The conversation was brief, each word a cold, smooth stone dropped into the silence. "Your grandfather was a sentimental man," Aunt Beatrice said, her voice thin and dry as a corn husk. "But sentiment doesn't pay bills. The house, the land, it all falls to us now. The debt is considerable." She looked at us then, a quick, dismissive glance. "There is nothing for you here." It was not cruel. It was worse than cruel. It was simple fact, delivered like a weather report. There was no room for grief, no space for argument. The world we had known, the world of 70 acres and the steady presence of our grandfather, was being dismantled before our eyes. We were told to pack a small bag. 1 bag each. Abigail tried to speak, her voice a whisper. But our home Uncle Robert cut her off, not unkindly, just with the finality of a closing door. This is our home now, child. The law is the law. We packed in silence, the sound of our movements echoing in the stillness. We packed the scent of wood smoke and old books, the memory of sunlight slanting across the floorboards, the ghost of our grandfather's quiet laughter. We walked down the lane for the last time, not daring to look back. The buggy was waiting. It carried us away, leaving our kingdom behind, and we did not know it was the beginning of a long winter, a winter of the soul that would last for 2 full years. The town was a place of sharp angles and narrow spaces. After a life defined by the open sky and the long, unbroken line of the horizon, the cramped boarding house room felt like a cage. We had one window that looked out onto a brick wall, and if you pressed your cheek to the glass and craned your neck, you could see a sliver of grey sky. That sliver became our 70 acres. We survived. That is the only word for it. We did not live, we endured. We found work at the laundry, our hands perpetually raw from lye soap and scalding water, the air thick with steam that never smelled of rain on dry earth. We learned the rhythms of the town, the shriek of the train whistle, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the murmur of voices from the saloon late at night. It was a world of strangers, of faces that looked past us, through us. We were 2 ghosts haunting the edges of other people's lives. We saved every penny we could, hoarding them in a small tin box under a loose floorboard. We spoke little of the farm. The memory was a wound, and we learned not to press on it. But it was always there. I would wake in the dark, the smell of the pine so real I could almost taste it, and the loss would wash over me again, a cold, relentless tide. Abigail was quieter than ever, her resilience a sharp, fragile thing. I would see her sometimes, standing by our small window, staring at that brick wall as if she could will it to dissolve and reveal the rolling fields beyond. We grew from 16 to 18 in that small room. We aged in a way that had nothing to do with birthdays. We learned that the world was hard and indifferent, that belonging was not a birthright but a privilege, and that we had lost it. We never spoke of our aunt and uncle. They were a closed chapter, the authors of our exile. We believed their story. We believed we were dispossessed, that our only inheritance was the strength in our own 2 hands, and that the land, our land, was gone forever. We learned to depend on nothing but each other, a bond forged not in the sunshine of our childhood, but in the dim, steamy confines of the town laundry. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was a plain white envelope, addressed to both of us, delivered by a boy who seemed surprised to find anyone living in our grim little room. The paper was thick, expensive, not like the thin, flimsy letters we occasionally received from a distant cousin. The return address was that of a law office in a town we'd never heard of, some 50 miles to the west. My hands trembled as I opened it. Abigail stood beside me, her breath held tight in her chest. The words were formal, dense with legal phrasing we could barely understand. It spoke of the estate of Henry Wallace. It requested our presence. It mentioned a final disposition of assets held in trust. A single sentence stood out from the rest, clear and sharp as a shard of glass. It concerned 70 acres of land in our home county. We read it 3 times, our minds refusing to grasp it. Hope is a dangerous thing when you have taught yourself to live without it. It felt like a trick, a cruel joke designed to reopen the wound we had worked so hard to close. What does it mean? Abigail whispered, her eyes wide, fixed on the page. I had no answer. It means we have to go, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. It meant a journey. It meant spending nearly every cent we had saved in the tin box on 2 train tickets. It meant facing a truth we were not prepared for, whether it was good or bad. For 2 years, we had been rooted in our loss, defined by what was taken from us. The letter, whether a promise or a final, formal dismissal, forced us to move. It was the first crack in the frozen ground, the first hint that the long winter might be ending. We packed our single bags again, but this time, it felt different. We were not fleeing an ending. We were walking toward a beginning, though we had no idea what we would find when we got there. Mr. Davies' office was on the second floor of a brick building that smelled of old paper and furniture Polish. He was an older man, with kind eyes behind spectacles and a deliberate way of moving, as if he weighed each action before he took it. He did not rush us with pleasantries. He sat us down in 2 sturdy chairs opposite his large oak desk and let the silence settle. He seemed to understand that we had carried a great weight to his door. Then, he began to speak, his voice calm and steady, and with every word, the world we had known for 2 years began to dissolve. He told us about a plan, a quiet, unannounced strategy our grandfather had put into motion years before his death. Grandpa Henry, he explained, knew his daughter and her husband. He knew their minds, which were sharp with numbers and dull with sentiment. He knew they saw the land as a commodity, a thing to be sold and converted into cash. And so, he had made 2 wills. The first, the one our aunt and uncle had seen, left them the house and its contents, along with a small annuity to live on, for the duration of their lives. It was just enough to make them believe they had inherited everything of value. But there was a second, legally binding document, a trust. And that trust contained the one thing he valued above all else. The land, Mr. Davies said, sliding a thick document across the desk toward us. The 70 acres. He never put it in their names. He put it in yours. He let the words sink in. He explained that our grandfather had stipulated the trust would remain sealed, its contents unrevealed, until we both reached the age of 18. He wanted us to be of legal age, to be able to stand on our own 2 feet, before we claimed it. He couldn't risk them talking you out of it, or cheating you, the lawyer said gently. He wanted you to be old enough to understand its worth. He wanted you to be ready. The deed was there, in black ink on crisp paper. Our names. Martha Wallace. Abigail Wallace. The sole and rightful owners. It was all there. A plan born of quiet love and shrewd foresight. He had not abandoned us. He had protected us. He had given us the one thing that could not be taken away, and he had hidden it in plain sight, waiting for us to be old enough to find it. The journey back was a blur. We sat on the train, the deed tucked safely in my bag, and watched the landscape roll by. The cramped town, the brick walls, the grey sliver of sky, it all felt like a bad dream we were finally waking from. We did not feel anger, not yet. We were too full of a strange, fragile joy, a feeling so unfamiliar it was almost painful. The anger would come later, a slow burn of indignation not at their greed, but at their casual dismissal of us, at the ease with which they had erased us from our own lives. We hired a buggy in our old town, the same way they had years before. The driver, a local man, eyed us with curiosity but said nothing. As we turned down the lane to the farm, my heart began to pound. It looked the same, yet different. The fences were in some disrepair, a few of the boards on the barn looked loose. There was a general air of neglect, the look of a place that was occupied but not loved. They were on the porch when we pulled up. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Robert. They watched us approach, their faces a mixture of confusion and annoyance. Mr. Davies had insisted on accompanying us, a silent, steady presence at our side. We walked up the path, the 3 of us, and I held the papers in my hand. Aunt Beatrice spoke first, her voice sharp. "What is the meaning of this? What are you doing here?" I did not answer her directly. I looked past her, at the house, our house, and then at the field stretching out beyond. I looked at the old cottonwood tree where Grandpa had hung a swing for us so many years ago. Then I looked back at her. "We've come home," I said. It was all I needed to say. Mr. Davies stepped forward and began to speak, his legal language calm and irrefutable. He laid out the terms of the trust, the legality of the deed, the simple, undeniable fact of our ownership. I watched my aunt's face as he spoke. The confusion turned to disbelief, then to a pale, tight-lipped fury. Uncle Robert just stared at the papers in my hand, as if they were written in a language he couldn't comprehend. He wouldn't have, Beatrice whispered, the words barely audible. He couldn't have done this, but he had. There was no great confrontation, no shouting match in the yard. Their defeat was as quiet and bloodless as their victory over us had been 2 years prior. The law, which they had used as a shield to cast us out, was now the very instrument of their own removal. They were given 1 week to vacate the premises. The house, Mr. Davies clarified, was also part of the trust now that we were of age. Their right to live in it had been temporary, a placeholder until we came into our inheritance. They packed in a resentful silence, their movements stiff and angry. We did not watch them. We did not wish to see their humiliation. We stayed in town for that week, returning only on the day they were set to leave. We stood at the bottom of the lane and watched their buggy pull away, loaded with their belongings, kicking up the same dust that had followed us on our own departure. They did not look at us. They did not say goodbye. And when they were gone, a profound quiet settled over the land again. It was the right kind of quiet this time, a quiet full of peace and possibility. We walked up to the house together, my sister and I. The door was unlocked. We pushed it open and stepped inside. It was our house again. It smelled faintly of them, a foreign scent of stale perfume and bitter disappointment. We walked through the rooms, opening every window, letting the clean, cool air sweep through, chasing out the last of their presence. We were home. We walked out the back door and stood together, looking out at the 70 acres that were ours. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields. It was overwhelming, the sheer reality of it. It was ours. The work, the responsibility, the future, it was all ours. We started that evening just by walking the fence line at the edge of the west pasture, our hands trailing along the rough wood, reacquainting ourselves with the shape and feel of our world. The first year was the hardest. The land had been neglected, the soil left fallow, the barn in need of repair. But the work felt different now. It was not the drudgery of the laundry, it was the purposeful ache of building our own lives. Every fence post we replaced, every row we hoed in the vegetable garden, every nail we hammered into the barn roof was an act of reclamation. We bought our first few head of cattle with the last of the money from the tin box and a small loan secured by Mr. Davies against the property. We bought a flock of chickens, their cheerful noise bringing life back to the dusty yard. We learned by doing, by making mistakes, and by remembering the quiet lessons of our grandfather. I would find myself standing in the field, unsure of what to do next, and the memory of his hands, the way he tested the soil or sighted along a fence post, would come back to me as clear as day. He had given us more than the land, he had given us the knowledge to care for it, a knowledge that was buried deep in our bones. Abigail, who had been so quiet and withdrawn in town, seemed to bloom. She had a touch with the animals, a patience and gentleness that was all her own. She was the one who could calm a nervous heifer or spot the first sign of sickness in the flock. I found my strength in the planning, in the rhythm of the seasons, in turning the earth and watching things grow. We worked from before sunrise until after sunset, falling into bed each night with a weariness so profound it was its own kind of peace. We were not just farming the land. We were healing it, and in doing so, we were healing ourselves. We were putting down roots so deep they could never be torn up again. The memory of our aunt and uncle faded, their presence shrinking until it was just a strange, sad story from another lifetime. They had tried to take our past from us, but in doing so, they had inadvertently given us our future. I think now about what it means to inherit something. It is not just about a piece of paper, a deed filed away at the courthouse. Our aunt and uncle inherited a house, but they never possessed it. They lived within its walls, but they never understood its heart. They saw only its monetary value, its use. They never saw the way the morning light fell across the kitchen floor, or felt the sturdiness of the foundation beneath their feet. Our true inheritance from Grandpa Henry was not the 70 acres. It was the love for the 70 acres. He taught us to see it not as a thing to be owned, but as a responsibility to be carried. He knew that if we loved it, truly loved it, we would never let it go. By allowing us to be cast out, by forcing us into a world that did not want us, he gave us the greatest gift of all, the unshakable knowledge of where we belonged. We had to lose our home to truly understand what it meant to have one. We had to learn what it was to have nothing, to be able to appreciate the magnificent gift of having everything that mattered. He trusted us. He trusted that the lessons he had taught us in silence would be enough to see us through the noise of the world. He trusted that the bond between my sister and me would be strong enough to withstand the hardship. He trusted that we would find our way back, not just to the land, but to ourselves. And we did. We stand on this porch, Abigail and I, not as victims of a cruel trick, but as the keepers of a legacy of quiet strength, of patient planning, and of a love so deep it could reach across the years and bring us home. The sun has dipped below the horizon now, painting the sky in strokes of orange and deep purple. The first stars are beginning to appear. Abigail comes to stand beside me, leaning her shoulder against mine. We don't need to speak. The cattle are settled in the pasture, their dark shapes peaceful against the fading light. The chickens are quiet in their coop. The neat rows of our garden are sleeping under the cool night air. This is our kingdom. This is our inheritance. And this time, we know its worth.